Hello and welcome to another episode of Down to Disness, a monthly series where I pick a Disney animated movie and talk about its history and its impact on pop culture. This month's movie is 1988's Oliver and Company, based off of the famous novel Oliver Twist. Oliver and Company came at a very unique moment in Disney animation history because it was during a weird transitional period where animation wasn't doing very well at the studio, and it came out right before the Disney Renaissance started. And in a lot of ways it actually contributed to the start of the Disney Renaissance. Kind of. In the 80s, Disney decided to start taking new pitches for animated features. At this time, Ron Clements and John Musker were pitching The Little Mermaid and Treasure Island in space. But at the same time, an animator named Pete Young suggested Oliver Twist, but with dogs. The story Oliver Twist, of course, is a book by Charles Dickens about an orphan boy who ends up working with a group of pickpockets in the big city. The original plan for Oliver and Company, the adaptation, was to have it a lot darker and grittier like the original novel. For example, originally, Oliver's parents were to be murdered by a couple of Sykes Dobermans, but they decided that was way too dark to have on screen and changed the story around to be somewhat more lighthearted. Additionally, in early development, the movie was supposed to be a sequel to The Rescuers. I don't know how exactly it was supposed to be a sequel to The Rescuers, except that there's animals, but the only thing that remained from that concept to what we have now is that it's set in New York and Penny and Jenny kind of look the same and have a similar sounding name. Right off the bat, what's interesting about Oliver and Company is that it takes place during present day, at least for the time that it was made. The story is set in 1988 New York City, and for that reason, they cast a lot of New York natives as voices for this movie. Famous actress and singer Bette Midler voices the poodle Georgette, and Billy Joel is the speaking and singing voice of one of the main characters, Dodger. A lot of voice talent for this movie, including Billy Joel, said that they took the job because they wanted to be a part of something that their children could watch. It's worth noting that Dodger is actually based on Billy Joel's appearance as well. In all of the clips of Billy Joel recording for Dodger, he's wearing a white t-shirt and black sunglasses, and he just looks exactly like Dodger the entire time. Dom DeLuise voices Fagin in this movie, and this was actually his first and only time voicing an animated character for Disney. He had voiced a lot of characters in Don Bluth's animated films, but this was his first chance to work with Disney, and he took that extremely seriously. He ad-libbed a lot of his lines for the role, and most of it was used for Fagin's actual performance in the movie. He also chose to be in Oliver and Company over a role in Don Bluth's Land Before Time, both of which came out on the same day in theaters. There were also a lot of big-name celebrities who turned down Oliver and Company because they did not think it would do very well. Marlon Brando, for example, was offered the role of Sykes but turned it down because he thought the movie was going to be a flop. Whitney Houston at one point was considered for the role of Rita, and Patrick Stewart was considered for the role of Francis, but he was too busy filming Star Trek to participate in the film. Also, Steve Martin and Burt Reynolds were both considered for the role of Dodger before it was given to Billy Joel. While New York is the backdrop for this story, the animators had to get creative and show New York from an animal's point of view. For that reason, they took reference photos of New York from 18 inches above the ground to get a dog's eye view of the city. Because of the film's location in New York and because it was made in the 80s, it was the first Disney animated film to have actual in-movie product placements. There are so many different companies that are featured in the New York skyline throughout the movie. For example, you'll see signs from Kodak, Sony, Diet Coke, and even McDonald's while watching Oliver and Company. Disney claims this wasn't paid product placement, but just put in there to make the setting more realistic. Of course, anytime Disney makes a movie featuring cats or dogs, they have to have some cameos from some of their classic films featuring cats and dogs. For that reason, there are a lot of cameos from characters from 101 Dalmatians and Lady and the Tramp in Oliver and Company. In the scene where Oliver wakes up on a truck's tire, you can see Roger from 101 Dalmatians crossing the street. And multiple dogs from 101 Dalmatians, including Pongo, make an appearance during the song Why Should I Worry? So like I said, this movie came at a very weird period of Disney animation history because a lot of things were changing, and Oliver and Company doesn't really get credit for a lot of those changes, but it actually had somewhat of an important hand in pushing forward changes in the animation department at Disney. For example, the CAPS system, which I've mentioned in other episodes of Down to Disness, was used for about 11 minutes of Oliver and Company. Skyscrapers, taxi cabs, Fagin's cart that he rides around in, and the final subway chase were all done using the CAPS system. Oliver and Company as a film actually had the first department set up specifically to do computer animation for the movie. And Oliver and Company was actually the last Disney film to use a technique called line overlay. Line overlay was a method where they made sure that backgrounds matched the lines of Xeroxed objects in the foreground. Oliver and Company was not only the first Disney animated musical since Fox and the Hound, but it was actually the first Disney animated movie to have a song written by Howard Ashman. Howard Ashman, as you should know from my other episodes of Down to Disness, was an extremely famous lyricist and musician that Disney used not only on Beauty and the Beast, but on Little Mermaid and Aladdin. And for Oliver and Company, he was hired to write the song Once Upon a Time in New York City, which is the opening number of the movie. The theme of this episode is that Oliver and Company doesn't get the credit it deserves. It was a box office success. Like I said, it came out the same day as Land Before Time, and while it didn't beat Land Before Time in the opening weekend at the box office, it did outperform that movie over time. Additionally, because it was so successful in theaters, Disney made a commitment after the release of Oliver and Company to come out with an animated feature every year thereafter, which is why I said it led to the Disney Renaissance. The success of Oliver and Company somewhat proved to the Disney company that animation was still important to people and that there was still money to be made through animation. And so they made this commitment to do one animated movie a year, which led, of course, to Rescuers Down Under and then to The Little Mermaid, which was the start of the Disney Renaissance. So without this proof of concept that animation was still cool, Disney Renaissance would not have happened. I really like Oliver and Company. I think that all of the characters are really memorable and cute in that it has a highly underrated soundtrack. Billy Joel, of course, is amazing, and I just love every song that is in Oliver and Company. And I think there's a lot of little things in this movie's history that show how it kind of continued to push animation forward. Of course, that is the theme of Down to Disness. How do these movies shape Disney animation and animation history as a whole? Every movie is important in its own way. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about a little orange cat and his doggo friends. No, for real, let me know if you learned something new about Oliver and Company in the comment section down below. Let me know what your favorite thing about this movie is as well. Also, leave your suggestions for movies you'd like to see me do in the comments down below. I have a playlist of Down to Disness videos, so if you've missed any, you can watch that. And I'm gonna be upfront with you guys. I like hopping between eras. So while I get a lot of requests for movies from the Disney Renaissance, I'm not gonna do a bunch of movies all from the 80s and 90s in a row. I like hopping from like the 90s to the 60s and then like the 80s to the 30s, like things like that. So keep that in mind with your suggestions, but I promise I will get to every single Disney animated movie eventually. Thank you guys so much for watching this month's Down to Disness, and I will see you next month with more Down to Disness. Bye!